child killer John Venables has today had his bid for freedom rejected by a parole board, providing huge relief for his victim's family. Venables was just 10 when he brutally tortured and killed 2-year-old James Bulger in 1993, and he'll now spend at least another 2 years in prison after parole chiefs deemed he is still a danger to society. Joining me now to discuss this is former Met Police Detective Chief Inspector Mike Neville and Head of Abuse Law at Slater and Gordon. He represents one of Gary Glitter's victims, Richard Scorer. Thanks both for joining us. Richard, let me start with you. I mean, I think I share the view of an awful lot of people in this country that they can't quite get their heads around why somebody like John Venables gets so many opportunities for parole, for a parole hearing, particularly not given just the heinous crime that he committed when he was a kid, but the fact that he's been recalled twice already. I mean, it seems mad to even consider it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a perfectly fair point. And as you say, he's been recalled to prison twice before after release because of reoffending. And you would have to be extraordinarily naive to think that he wouldn't reoffend again. And not even the parole board would be that naive. But they have, of course, made serious errors in other cases. I was involved in the John Warboys case a few years ago, yes. The London taxi cab rapist who they wanted to release. Ultimately, that was that decision was overturned after the intervention of a court when victims went to court to get it overturned. So, you know, the record actually of the parole board in this area has often not been particularly good, unfortunately.
No, I remember that case very well. I remember there was a judicial review asked for as well, wasn't there, by Mr. Gork, who I think was the Attorney General at the time, and he turned it down and he wouldn't do it. And it was only, as you say, for the people who, a couple of high-profile people as well, who actually pushed that case through, that he was not allowed out, because he even revealed that he had still got the names and addresses of some of his victims.
That's right. And I mean, one of the problems with the parole board, and I think this is a really important point, is we don't actually know very much about how they make the decisions that they do make. I mean, I can tell you in theory about how the parole board work and the sort of evidence that they hear, but the reality is that we don't actually know very much about how that works in practice, because the vast majority of parole board hearings are conducted in private. And, you know, even when victims like my client, who's a victim of Gary Glitter, want there to be a public hearing, that is usually turned down. I think there've only been 3 public parole board hearings so far. So we don't actually know very much about the decision-making process, despite, you know, the theory in this country is we have open justice. We don't actually get that with the parole board.
No, we absolutely don't. Mike, let me come to you, because as a police officer, you must be very frustrated about the way that these criminals are treated, because I think you're absolutely right to say it, Kim, that basically, at the end of the day, there was supposed to be an open parole hearing for this guy. It didn't happen because lawyers on his behalf pushed for his privacy to be protected, and they wouldn't even let a newspaper come in, never mind members of the victim's family.
That's right, and I mean, I'm pleased that I sent a message by Denise Bulger just to say that the mums to say thank you for speaking out on television and say that this man should never be released, and of course Venables should not be released, because when we release people like who are burglars or robbers or whatever else, we're taking a chance that they won't do that again. But we shouldn't be taking any chances with people who commit crimes against children, who are paedophiles. And Venables has killed and abused one child, and then he's been sent back to prison twice for being in possession of obscene and vile child pornography. So he should be kept away from the public. And why there should be any hearing in 2 years is beyond me, because it's just a waste of public money. This man should never be released, because he's an absolute danger. He must know in himself that there is a danger that he cannot control, and he will offend against children in some way the moment he is released. The moment he's released, he can have access to the internet, no matter how much they try to stop him. I mean, I ran a sex offender unit in Lambeth. There were hundreds of people and 5 police officers. The idea that you could regularly check on them, it's just not happening. So the public would be let down there. He must remain in prison for the rest of his life, in my view.
And, I mean, to come back to you, Richard, is there any kind of precedent, or could there be some kind of law change made which would, in my view, help, I think, which would say that if you were released on parole and you offended and you were taken back into custody, could you not have to reset your whole parole situation, i.e. go back to the beginning of your sentence, if you like, so you don't get another opportunity for quite a long time?
I think there's a very strong argument for that. I mean, my client, who, as I said before, is a victim of Gary Glitter, has to deal with the situation where obviously he was released on licence not very long ago. It was then discovered that he was trying to access the dark web. Incidentally, just to make the point, and this goes to what Mike was saying, that the fact that he was trying to do that was uncovered by the Sun newspaper. It wasn't uncovered by the probation service, who were charged with protecting the public from him. So there's an issue there. But then he's come back into prison, and then the next parole hearing for him will be at the end of January. So it's within a very short space of time, he is then able to reapply to be released. It's an unacceptable situation, and I absolutely agree that it needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely right. And Mike, when you see these kind of campaigns by families who want to see the victim, and sorry, not the victim, but the victim's assailant, to look them in the eye, to go to these hearings, on what grounds could those lawyers actually say, no, you can't do that because it might be upsetting to the convict, effectively?
Well, what you have here, of course, is quite a special case that both the murderers of James Bulger were granted anonymity for life. And so that's the strongest argument that they will offer on this case. And I'm sure, but there's 1,000 ways they could have done this, with screens, with having a separate room, whatever else. But the families, in my view, they must be given a chance to speak out, to explain the awfulness of the situation. No mother or father should lose a child, never mind lose a child in the circumstances that the Bulger family did. And they must be given the opportunity to speak out and state their risks as well. But that was denied them. And so what people see all the time is that the too many lawyers, and forgive me, our guests, too many lawyers, too many judges, they seem to take the side of the villain and not the victim, and that is a bad thing.
Yeah, and from what I'm understanding, I don't know if you can confirm this, Richard, that he didn't actually appear at his own parole board hearing in the end anyway, despite the fact that they'd made it all very possible for him to be there and not be identified. But he having told them that he was completely rehabilitated and was no longer a danger to the public, he basically didn't want to suffer any disproportionate stress.
Yeah, well, I mean that's my understanding, and obviously, I've read that as you have, and I think that there needs to be a lot more transparency about the way the parole board operates. We do need to have open justice. We do need to have public hearings so that people can see how the process is actually conducted. There's a real need for that change, and I think it has to happen sooner rather than later.
And what do you think long term, though, we can do with people like Venables? Because, as you say, I don't think anybody in their right mind, apart from people on the parole board, even would consider letting him out. I always say to people who say, well, it would be very difficult, we would have to spend an awful lot of money, we'd have to give him a new identity, we'd have to move him somewhere in the world where he couldn't be recognised, and all of those things. To which I always say, well, just don't let him out then. But then it costs us an awful lot of money to keep him in as well.
It costs us a lot of money, but I think... Sorry.
Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
I think public protection demands that serious sex offenders, and I believe that Venables is one of those, actually, public protection demands that serious sex offenders are kept in jail for as long as possible, because the reality is that there is overwhelmingly likely that they will reoffend, and we've seen that in case after case. And so, public protection has to come first, the protection of children has to come first, and these people have to be kept in jail for as long as possible, is my view.
Yeah. Mike, I'm sure you share that view. I mean, I interviewed him.
Absolutely share that. He is evil personified. You talk about nature versus nurture. This is a case of nature, in my view. Venables is evil. He has evil blood within him. They'll never stop him. Whatever programs he goes on, whatever he does, whenever he's released, he will find a way to abuse children. And so that he must never be released, in my view.
Yes. I mean, I once interviewed a paedophile who told me, and he wanted to be interviewed, he said, look, I will never stop wanting to do what I want to do. I will never be able to stop. There's nothing that's good about what my desires are for children, and I can never be persuaded not to have them. And I think the sooner that the justice system recognises that, I mean, you don't become a paedophile and then just give up, do you?
Absolutely. And this is what I'm saying about evil being in their veins. They just can't help themselves. We could do all sorts of chemical castration, whatever else. Maybe that could play a part. But these wicked desires will always be there. And there simply isn't enough probation officers and police officers to monitor them all the time. You know, we see criminals taking tags off. There's all this talk of using electronic devices. The best way to stop people like Venables and him in particular committing offences against children is to lock him up and throw away the key. It's that simple. It costs money, but how much value do we put on the innocence of children's lives?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the story's in the Sun in tomorrow's paper. We're going to be seeing that a little bit later on in the show. There's no way out for Bulger killer is the headline, and Denise Fergus talking about it as well, because fortunately Denise Fergus says the decision is the best thing that has happened to her for 30 years. And she said, I hope Venables now gets to feel a bit of the anguish that I have felt. And that's the Daily Mirror's version, Justice for my James. I mean, Denise Fergus has had a terrible time of it, all told, hasn't she? Because, I mean, I was around when the original report came out, and some of the things that happened that we haven't really been made public about James Bulger's death. Just awful.
Yeah, if you want my answer, yes, and all credit to her, all credit to Denise for her strength, and the father as well, Ralph, for pushing all the time, not letting it go. Their strength is wonderful, and it keeps their little boy's name in our minds, so we know that we should be dealing with the Venables in the way that we are dealing with him. He hasn't got parole, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, Richard, do you think that there would ever be a conversation that could be had around the death penalty for these kinds of crimes? Because obviously, whenever you do these kind of conversations on radio, on TV, or in newspaper columns and things, you know, there's always quite a lot of support for the possibility that the death penalty could be introduced. Would you ever see a time when that could be done?
I don't think that's likely in this country, to be honest. Obviously, the death penalty was abolished, you know, decades ago, and I don't think it's likely that that would come back. But I do think we need to have a proper conversation, as Mike has said, about how we deal with serious sex offenders. And it's completely wrong that victims, and whether you're talking about Denise Bulger or you know, my client who's a victim of Gary Glitter, have to live with this constant merry-go-round of you know, will they be released, won't they be released, when's the next hearing coming up to to decide whether they can be released back into the community again. It's a completely wrong and unacceptable, and the stress it places on victims is really appalling. And I think, you know, for their sake, we need some proper sort of settled certainty over the way that serious sex offenders are dealt with, and that I think has to happen.